Hello guys and welcome to episode 42 of the Beat Your Backlog podcast, a podcast discussing the things gamers like to put off, get to another day, and oh yes, will definitely beat later, their backlog. I'm your host Adam, and today we are heading off on a quest to Middle-earth in one of my favourite games ever, The Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. And yeah, maybe you've never actually heard of The Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. The reason that I'm doing this podcast now was because I had a kind of a little bit of a dip, like a break in new game releases between finishing Cat Quest 3 and kind of waiting until the September wave of amazing games launched. So I had about 2 weeks where I was like, I maybe I don't want to buy a new game. I want to play something that's been on my backlog for a while. And because of the Rings of Power Amazon TV show, I was like, okay, I should play Lord of the Rings: The Third Age. And yeah, Third Age is a game that released back in 2004. It was originally developed by EA Redwood Shores, who would later become Visceral Games, who are the developers of the very famous and renowned Dead Space series, which I actually didn't know before this, but it kind of not necessarily makes sense, but we'll get into how good this game is and the quality in the game, and I think that probably then rolled over into Dead Space. And if my memory serves me right, the game was released around the same time as GTA San Andreas, so I think it was like November 2004, around that time, like around the big Christmas push. And I think that's the reason why the game maybe went a little bit under the radar at the time, because GTA San Andreas was such a big, impactful game at the end of 2004. And at least I remember with my friends at the time, they all kind of gave me strange looks when I told them, I wasn't going to be playing GTA over Christmas. I was going to be playing a new Lord of the Rings game instead. However, at the time I couldn't really resist. I was and still am, such a massive Lord of the Rings fan. Then around that time, I remember I had like this big old like CRT TV with a VHS player built into it, and more or less every night, as I was kind of like getting ready for bed, I would just have the Two Towers and the Return of the King on loop on VHS, especially the Two Towers, because that was a movie I never went and saw in the cinema and had to wait for the VHS. And I remember, back in those days, it was like 6 months later the VHS or DVD would come out with the movie, so I hadn't seen it in the cinemas, had to wait such a long time to see it. And then I remember just watching it on loop, and I could recite a lot of the lines from the very first section of the movie. So I was a very, very big Lord of the Rings nerd, and I was also kind of craving more stories from Middle-earth, from the Lord of the Rings world, and specifically, I guess, from Tolkien. And it wasn't just the movies that I was addicted to. Back then, there was also two very, very good licensed games that came out, the kind of like hack and slash games for the Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers and the Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. Both of them were excellent. Me and my brother spent a lot of time playing them. And yeah, they just felt very, very high quality for the time. Like at the time, there was a lot of sort of movie tie-in games that were just kind of spat out to meet and hit deadlines for when the movies came out, and these games did that as well. But they had a lot of love in them. They kind of followed the main story of the movies, and you got to play along. And I remember being addicted to the Two Towers, and then going into the Return of the King and seeing gameplay for the Return of the King where you got to play as Gandalf the White, and it started at Helm's Deep, and it just felt so epic. And these games just were a huge part of kind of my adolescent years as growing up as a kind of Lord of the Rings nerd. And one of the things that I remember, because I think back then there was a game store in my town called Choices, and they would put up like games that were coming out as like pre-order stuff, or like maybe it was even before pre-order times. But I remember seeing the box art for the Third Age, and thinking it was a thing of beauty, because it was to a 13-year-old kind of Lord of the Rings nerd. There was, if you haven't seen the box art, there is the massive Balrog there. There is then on the bridge, kind of over Khazad-dûm, is Gandalf with 3 new characters that we had never seen before, but who kind of unsurprisingly looked very familiar. There was a man, an elf, and a dwarf, and it just completely drew me in, because I didn't know these characters. So I was like, so who are they? How does this work into the Lord of the Rings movies? Because it was very obviously based off of the movies. Why is Gandalf with them, and what on earth is a Balrog doing there? And I still think to this day, I think the box art is stunning, and when you turn it over on the back, it shows you some of the new characters that are in the game. And again, it's just this question of like, who are these people? Like they're very recognizable as members of the peoples of Middle-earth, but at the time I just didn't know who they were. And like I said, I think I'd seen the movies 100 times by then, so it was very kind of intrigued about the game, and it kind of just like tickled my fancy. And it's kind of why I think my original game, I actually played it back on the original Xbox, but a couple of years ago I decided to rebuy the GameCube game, or the GameCube version, for a bargain. I think it cost me like £3. But you might be asking, what is The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, and why is it maybe not remembered as fondly as those other two games that came out at the time that were also kind of movie tie-ins? And, is it worth going back playing 20 years after its release? So let's find out in this week's episode of the Beat Your Backlog podcast. But before we get into this incredible game, I would just like to remind you that if you're enjoying the podcast so far and want to hear more, please subscribe or follow and leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening. So let's get on with The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age. So to be honest, that question of what is The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age was a question on my lips as soon as I got it home and popped the disc into my Xbox on that chilling November night back in 2004, because I literally had no idea. I'd really just bought the game purely because of my love of The Lord of the Rings and because the box art was so intriguing and looked so gorgeous. But upon starting my game and seeing the awesome kind of prelude cutscene that felt very much like the Jackson movies, where in the Fellowship, you have Galadriel kind of giving you this overview of the rings and everything, and you're getting these beautiful scenes of kind of the New Zealand habitats and environments that make Middle-earth. It's very much like that. You have these cutscenes, the clips are taken directly from the movies, and it is narrated by the one and only Sir Ian McKellen, who, if you don't know, is Gandalf. And it really convinced me that I'd made the right decision on buying this game and not buying San Andreas. So the game's story follows a character called Berefor, who is a guard of the citadel of Minas Tirith, and he's obviously then a human, a man, and a Gondorian, and he is on the trail of his liege lord Boromir, who has of course set off to get to the Council of Elrond, and Berefor, I can't remember specifically why, but Berefor is tasked with kind of trailing Boromir with some kind of message. I don't know if it's that Boromir's father, was it Derefor, is annoyed that he's gone off to the Council of Elrond and has therefore sent Berefor to kind of bring him back to Minas Tirith. But either way, on his way to Rivendell, Berefor is set upon by a group of Nazgul. After fighting gallantly, Berefor is overcome by the riders in black, and just when it looks like his time on Middle-earth is at an end, the Gondorian is saved by a blonde-haired elf who washes the Nazgul filth away with her water magic. The elf, Idriel, agrees to help Berefor on his quest to find Boromir, which then in turn kind of turns into Berefor and his companions following in the footsteps of the Fellowship of the Ring at the behest of Gandalf the Grey. Along the way, Berefor and Idriel make friends with the other peoples of Middle-earth, such as a dwarf, a Dunedain, and a member of the Rohirrim, and they travel together through the iconic locations of the Tolkien books, but mostly more of the Peter Jackson movies, like the Mines of Moria, Rohan, Gondor, even then eventually into Mordor. And I remember, maybe you can kind of tell from the tone of my voice, or maybe not, my voice is a bit croaky today, but I remember absolutely kind of loving this story as a teenager because it felt such a cool expansion of the world of Tolkien. And it was back at a time when I didn't really realise there were countless books and stories written by Tolkien set in Middle-earth. So it just felt like such a cool way to expand the Lord of the Rings universe. Like at the time, I was aware that there was the Hobbit book, but I was also aware that there was only 3 Lord of the Rings books. I didn't read them back then. I'd just obviously seen the movies, but I was aware that this was the ending, and the movies made me want it more. And this game kind of gave me that, because it gives you the kind of like this B plot that's happening kind of parallel to the movies, which I think is a great idea. And it also introduces you into this kind of wide cast of characters, and also a lot of characters that we'd kind of heard about in the movies but not necessarily had that much time kind of with them. So it was a really cool kind of twist and take on the Lord of the Rings and a Lord of the Rings game. And now, 20 years later, playing through the early part of the story again, I still think it's actually really good. I think it's very much based on a lot of the tropes from the books and the movies. So, for example, the first three characters you meet are a human, an elf, and a dwarf, which is kind of, you know, a parallel to Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. And then the first elf you meet, Idriel, she's female, and she ends up giving up her gift of eternal life to save Berefor from the Nazgul, which again is what Arwen does for Frodo. And I was just kind of thinking it's random that Idriel just gives up her gift of eternal life for a stranger, but now I'm also thinking that's kind of what Arwen did as well. So makes sense, I suppose. And then you also kind of, before you enter the Mines of Moria, you end up fighting the Watcher in the water, the huge octopus, and so on. So it kind of really takes like these high points of the movies and kind of repeats them in the game itself to give you kind of high points in the game too. So it's a little bit of that kind of saying like same but different. Like it's a lot of the same stuff, kind of hitting the same beats of the movies, but has its own kind of unique story, which is cool. However, the game does layer on quite a lot of like other Tolkien lore, so it's not that might not have been so thoroughly kind of explored in the movies. So, for example, when you go into Moria, it does go into more depth, no pun intended, about the mineral mines of Moria. No, not the mineral mines, sorry, the mithril mines of Moria, like why the dwarves dug so deep, what happened, how they awoke the Balrog. It's also kind of cool because it's also, again, like you're parallel to the Fellowship. So by the time you get to Moria, you're just behind them. And you kind of get to the section where they camp, and there's like 3 doorways which they can go through, and Gandalf doesn't know the way, and it's where I think Frodo sees Gollum. And then eventually Gandalf says, okay, we're going this way because it doesn't smell as bad as the other 2. And in the game, you kind of go down an opposite path and end up below the Fellowship, and the kind of corpse that Pippin knocks down the well ends up like falling down on you and then causing you to enter a battle, and you can hear like Gandalf's echoey voice calling him a fool of a took. So again, it's just like these really cool like Easter eggs and again like highs from the movies that it adds to the game to make the game feel very, very authentic to the Peter Jackson movies and to the Lord of the Rings lore, which is awesome. Plus, the game has a lot of kind of short cutscenes that you can sort of unlock as you get to maybe a certain location or find a certain item. And again, these cutscenes are all kind of it's taken the kind of the video is taken from the movies themselves, and not just the movies, but the extended versions of the movies. And they're also narrated by Sir Ian McKellen. And it also is just giving you a bit more like backlog on certain aspects of the Lord of the Rings world, of Tolkien's world. And I remember at the time when the game came out, I don't think I knew there was an extended version of the movies. So I remember being completely like enthralled by watching these cutscenes and being like, hey, I don't remember seeing that in the movies, because it shows you like what's her name, Galadriel giving the Fellowship like the gifts, each individual gift, and I was like, that's weird. Like, I remember that they get the green cloaks and they get the little leaf pendant or clasp that holds the cloak together, but I never remember her explaining what this was and what the cloaks do and stuff like that. So it was really, really kind of cool and being like, hey, what is this stuff? Like, I've never seen this before. And I think it's really cool that they included that into the game. There's also, again, like that extra layer of Lord of the Rings nerddom that we're not just going to use the footage from the movies, we're going to use the footage from the extended scenes to really help give you some like backlog and also some kind of like extra level of story that other, more casual Lord of the Rings fans might not know. And I think that's really cool. Again, it's kind of, the story kind of turns into basically Gandalf somehow communicating with Berefor through these cutscenes and telling him what he needs to do next. But then it's also then Gandalf, giving you like the lore on maybe you find like the camp that the Fellowship had where the crows fly over them, who are like the spies of Sauron, and Gandalf kind of gives you like a bit of text about, we tried to hide here, and that's what drove us into the mountains and eventually into Moria. So again, it's really, really cool. And the game itself also has a lot of like in-game rendered cutscenes that do feel very, very cinematic and kind of, again, hit those notes of the movies where you kind of like, okay, I've seen this before. It's very similar, especially like in the Mines of Moria, where you find Balin's grave, and again, the dwarf character gets given an axe, a new axe, kind of like Gimli does in the movie. Again, I think that's only in the extended version that that's actually explained to you. So again, it hits these high points again, which is really cool. And I think they still look quite good. The cutscenes, they do feel very cinematic. I think the only thing now that kind of ages them is the quality of the audio recording of the voices. Like it kind of really feels like the characters weren't in the same room when they recorded it. Like they're not necessarily, their line delivery is a little bit like off. Like one has maybe a lot of emotion, where the other one, the person answering, has a kind of more robotic response. So there's kind of that, and also the quality. It feels very like tinny. So it feels like it was recorded in like a massive room where there's like a lot of echo and feedback. And yeah, that's the only thing that kind of lets it down. But otherwise, I still think the way the story is portrayed is great with these two types of cutscenes. And yeah, I think it just really shows that the people that made this game were real Lord of the Rings fans who kind of wanted to create a great Lord of the Rings story for fellow fans of the movies and books. And I think because of that, the story, the characters, and the detail in the game is still up there as one of the best Lord of the Rings games, and like probably the best Lord of the Rings game you've never heard of, is how I'm going to pitch this episode to try and get the clickbait. But I actually do believe that. I think there are a lot of Lord of the Rings games. Obviously, the more modern ones. I mean, the really modern ones are really bad so far, like the newest Gollum game, and then you have Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor. But from this old collection, I think this is really like this is a Lord of the Rings fans game. Like, this is made for Lord of the Rings nerds, and I think it still holds up as one of the best Lord of the Rings games, and it's really, really a top quality Lord of the Rings product. And yeah, so we've kind of discussed the story of the Third Age, but what are you actually doing in the game? Well, before we get onto the game's mechanics, let me remind you that if you're enjoying the podcast so far, please remember to follow and give us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Now, on to the rest of the game. And the rest of the game, so the gameplay, I think the easiest way to describe the gameplay is that the game is a Lord of the Rings Final Fantasy game, and very specifically Final Fantasy X. So it's split up into two parts. The first part is a third-person view, where you play as Berofor, not Borofor, I'm mixing up the two names, Berofor. You can kind of control him, and you get to explore like a very linear parts of Middle Earth, and it's kind of split up into the different regions. So there's like Eregion, Moria, Rohan, like the Gondorian fields, like it, and within each of those areas, it is kind of like a level where there are lots of paths which kind of all eventually funnel you down to a direction that you need to go. But it's again, it gives you some room to explore. And as you explore, you may find chests that will give your team members like either new armor, new weapons, potions that you can use during battle, or you may come across random enemy fights that you have to then obviously fight and defeat. And again, the exploration is quite limited and quite linear, but it is still filled with a lot of Lord of the Rings Easter eggs. So when you are in Eregion and you're trying to make your way to, I think, Rivendell, you are exploring, and there are like stone trolls that have obviously been like out in the sun and have turned to stone. And if you've seen The Hobbit or you've read The Hobbit, you know this is a very like a thing that exists within the world. That if trolls are outside during the sun, then they get turned to stone. So there's nice little Easter eggs like that where you think, okay, cool. Like, again, the people making this game are big Lord of the Rings, Hobbits, Tolkien fans, which is really, really cool. And one thing that I still sticks in my mind, and it actually came up during my review of Dungeons of Hinterberg, is how cool the armor and weapons look in this game, and that every time you equip a new piece of armor or weapon, it shows up on your character in the battle or in cutscenes. And I think for the reason it sticks in my mind was because I think this is the first game that I ever saw it do this, where especially in cutscenes, your character wasn't just the bog standard character that you start the game off with, but they are wearing the armor that is currently equipped. And I think it's an awesome feat, and something that a lot of modern games still don't really do. That's why I brought it up in Dungeons of Hinterberg, because you also got a lot of new armor and new weapons, but your character in third person view never ever changed. And I was like, I wish she looked like she was leveling up. And yeah, because it's just something very, very satisfying seeing your character visually level up with cool armor and weapons. And it's the case in the game that the armor and weapons look like they've literally just been ripped straight out of the Jackson movie. So again, it kind of feels like at first you have this very rusty, kind of dulled kind of plate armor for Berefor, and then right now in Moria, I found like this silver, very ornate looking armor, and he just looks awesome. And it's the same for all of the characters. And this is by far, I think, the best part of the game is finding cool loot and seeing your characters visually upgrade. And also, kind of in this overworld, there are quests that you can do. However, these are very, very basic and just kind of like get to a location or kill X amount of enemy type. So it might be like go kill 3 wargs or something like that. And I think they're there mostly to encourage the player to explore off the beaten path. However, I enjoyed exploring just to find chests and the cool goodies inside them. So the quests I kind of naturally did. They weren't really in the way or annoying. It was kind of like I was just walking around anyway, looking for chests and looking for loot, and would end up completing the quest either way. So yeah, there was that. And then if we get onto the combat specifically, so combat is turn-based, as you might have imagined, since we said it's a bit like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy X. Your team is built around 3 active characters, with any other characters you have ready to switch in whenever you need them. Each characters have moves that are specific to them. Nevertheless, I'll group the moves up into kind of 3 groups to try and explain how combat works. So basically you have like a regular attack, you have a special physical attack, and you have a special magical attack. So if we take Berefor, for example, his special physical attacks, which are called sword crafts, are all based around him hitting someone with a sword, but whilst he does it, he either applies a debuff to the enemy, or he applies a buff to himself. And the debuffs might be something like lowering strength or doing damage over time, or maybe even hitting the enemy twice. It's not necessarily a debuff, but that's kind of what the swordcrafts do. And on the other hand, his special magic attacks are called leadership, and these are used to buff your team. So these could be used to raise your attack, raise your speed, give a certain companion like 2 attacks, things like that, which is really cool. And then if we look at Idriel the elf, her special physical attacks are also called Swordcraft and are pretty similar to Berefor's, but her magical attacks are more elf themed. So therefore she has a very powerful water attack called Loud Water Fury, which if you've seen the first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, it looks exactly like the magic that Arwen uses to wash away the Black Riders from the river, where it's like a wave of horses taking them out. And yeah, again, kind of like a nod to the movies there. But for each character, the special and magical skills are really tailored around them. And there can be multiple skills that you unlock per kind of category throughout the game. So it's not like you only have 1 or 2 for each category. It's like you have like a menu that you can go in and choose each kind of move, which one you want to do, which is really cool. And the unlocking mechanic in the game is pretty cool. Like, I've never played Final Fantasy X, so if you're saying this is what it's like in Final Fantasy X, okay, cool. I've never played that game, so I'm just judging the game on judging the kind of mechanics on the third age. But yeah, the way you unlock new mechanics is by using, so if you want a new swordcraft, you have to keep using swordcraft's moves in battle, and then when eventually you hit like a milestone or a checkpoint, you will then unlock the next one. And what's really cool is that you can actually choose, which I didn't know until playing the game again now, but you can actually choose what skill your character learns next via a skill menu in the menu. And it's really cool because then you can kind of tailor your character's build around certain skills, buffs or debuffs. Or it might be, for example, you're in Moria and you know there is a Balrog there, that maybe you want your character, the dwarf I think he's called Hadhod. Maybe you want him to learn the move that negates fire damage. So then you can select that to be like, all right, learn this one next, because I know when I fight the Balrog's most likely going to have fire attacks. So then that will help my team if he learns that skill, which is really cool. But yeah, no matter what special attack you use, so either physical or magical, it will cost you AP, which of course you probably guessed, AP stands for action points, and this is the game's mana system. Once a character runs out of AP, the only thing that they can do is use a basic attack, which they can use for free. You can use a potion to restore AP, or you can kind of skip your move if you wanted to, and have characters like Idriel restore AP if you've learned the certain skills to do that. So yeah, a lot of the early game is basically managing your AP because none of your characters have a lot of it. But as you progress and level up your characters and specialize their stats to fit their builds, AP becomes less of an issue. So again, with Idriel, there are about 8 different skills you can level up as you go, and each level you get like 1 or 2 points. And they basically fall into the same, I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but they fall into the tried and tested RPG skills of like strength, health, mana, critical hit chance, what else, like dodge chance. So yeah, for Idriel, I put all of hers into mana because she has the best AP moves. For Berefor, I put all of his stuff into strength. For Hadhod the Dwarf, I put everything into his health because he's like a tank unit. There's a character that's an archer. I put everything into dexterity, so he gets a lot of critical hits and a lot of and also speed. So yeah, it's very RPG like. And yeah, if you have any understanding of RPGs and managing skills and stats, then you know how it will work. But I remember, yeah, as a kid playing the game for the first time, not really understanding this concept. And kind of like with Pokemon, I would only use like physical attacks against Sauron's bad guys. So not surprisingly, I didn't get very far in the game. I actually just got past, I remember the first time I played, I got to a battle in Moria where your team is encircled by goblins. And I remember playing this over and over and over and just not being able to beat them because what I was doing was only using like the physical attacks, never using like Berefor's leadership to buff my team. And I didn't realize that there is a rotate. So it's like there's a circle of goblins around you. I think there's 6, and each character has to fight 2. But I didn't realize that once your one character kills both of their enemies, you can then kind of rotate the circle so that they're facing someone else, so they can keep attacking. So basically, what would happen would be, I would kill 2 enemies with Berefor, and then for the rest of the battle, I wouldn't use him because he had no enemies to attack, and then eventually the enemies would whittle me down and kill me. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the frustrations I had when first playing the game. But eventually I realized that, using the buffs and the debuffs helps you out a lot. And 20 years after its release, I still actually really enjoy the combat. I think, yes, like compared to a lot of modern games, it feels very, very slow. For example, attack animations can't be skipped, which means a single round of combat may take 1 or 2 minutes. However, the strategy behind the combat still feels very fun to play. There's kind of like a rock, paper, scissor aspect to it. In some ways, with characters having moves that are very strong against certain enemy types. So Berefor has an attack called Orcbane, which is obviously very good against Orcbane. Hadhod has one against goblins, and then the archer character has one against animals. So it's kind of then, as you come up against battles against orcs, you're like, okay, I should switch in Berefor because he does more damage to them, or one of the other characters, which is cool. But like I said before, to succeed in combat, there is still quite a lot of thinking and thinking ahead that you need to do, and using your buffs and debuffs. And even now, as a 30-year-old or 30-plus pro gamer in quotation marks, I don't think I could beat the game by brute forcing it with physical attacks. It's mostly just about using a lot of the kind of the buffs, the debuffs, the magic, the healing, stuff like that you need to do in RPGs, obviously, to succeed. And honestly, having played the game and saying it's one of my favorite games ever, I have actually never beat it. I came very, very close once where I got to the very final section of the game. And in the final section, you have 2 big boss fights back to back. First, you fight the Mouth of Sauron, which again was awesome because I'd never ever heard of the Mouth of Sauron because he's only in the extended versions of the movies. And then you go on and actually fight the Eye of Sauron. And I remember I would always beat the Mouth, but could never beat Sauron's Eye. And there's no save point between them either. So basically you have to do these 2 very hard boss fights back to back. And I remember just like banging my head against the wall with the fights and eventually just giving up and being like, okay, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And it was also back there, I don't know, maybe you had you had this experience as well as like a teenager or kid, maybe because we had so much time on our hands back then. But my reaction was like, okay, not maybe to change up my strategy. my reaction was always, okay, I have to start the game from the beginning again, because I must have made some mistake along the way with my build to not be able to beat him. And I think when I came to with that choice and being like, all right, do I need to play the game again from the start? That's when I was like, okay, I'm done with the game. But yeah, hopefully this time I will get back to it. Like the plan going forward is to keep kind of playing the game when there are lulls in new games coming out. But right now in September, we have a ton of awesome games coming out. So probably in September, I won't get back to it. But my hope is that I keep coming back, keep making a little bit of progress, and then eventually beat the game. And yeah, it's not just the main campaign that the game has, it has some nice little extras too. So there is an evil mode which lets you play as the bad guys. It's sort of like a battle rush mode, where you can play as orcs, wargs, ringwraiths and uruks against Berethor and his band of merry men, elves and dwarfs. And it's sort of like, yeah, once you beat a chapter in the main game, you can then go back and play the chapter again as the bad modes and evil modes. And what I think is really cool is that if you manage to beat the battle rush, you then are rewarded items that you can then use in your main campaign. So it's kind of like you do the evil mode, you get some cool items, some cool gear, which then can be used against bad guys in the main campaign, which is really cool. And yeah, even though it's an old game and as we'll get onto, it was a little bit of a hassle to set up to play, I still really like playing the Third Age. It's one of those few games that I have a lot of nostalgia for, along with like the Pokemon Blue and Red, Star Wars: The Knights of the Old Republics 1 and 2. But yeah, like I said, playing it in 2024 was not the easiest thing to do. So actually getting the game itself was quite straightforward. I bought a GameCube version from it's like I guess it's online and kind of physical retailer, like reseller, called CEX in the UK, and it cost me literally like, I think, £2 or £3. However, having not been able to find my GameCube, which was very annoying, I decided I would buy myself a Nintendo Wii, because the original Wiis are backwards compatible with GameCube games, and because the Wii itself has a lot of really great games on it that I never played when I was playing a Wii, because, you know, back then I was using the Wii mostly for like Wii Sports and some other random games. But annoyingly, what I did not know was that you actually can't play GameCube games on the Wii with the Wii controller. You have to buy a GameCube controller, and you also need to buy a GameCube memory card to save GameCube games on the Wii, even though the Wii itself has internal memory, or you can slide an SD card into the Wii and save games there. So this was a little bit of annoyance, but because of the ease of Amazon, you know, I was able to search for a third-party wireless GameCube controller and memory card. So it was quite easy. I just had to wait a couple of days until they arrived to actually play the game. But yeah, if you are listening to this podcast and like, I would like to, maybe try the game out for myself. Yeah, buying the game itself is easy, but then I ended up dishing out like probably about €150 in total for the Wii, the GameCube controller, and the memory card. So the best way probably to experience this game is probably via emulation. I actually dabbled myself looking for ROMs and found that someone had also upscaled the game's graphics to 4K, which is pretty cool, because I think the graphics in this game actually look quite good still. Like I think there is that generation, like that PS2, Xbox and GameCube generation, where graphics still look quite nice in it, because they aren't as kind of blocky as the generation before, but they also aren't as like high polygon as the generation after. So you don't get the weird like blocky kind of triangular heads like the PS1, but you also don't get like this weird uncanny look to people's facial expressions, because the facial expressions weren't that good then. So I think it kind of fits nicely graphically, or like from like an art style, well, that it still looks good. The problem, of course, is the resolution, because I'm playing it on like a 65-inch TV with a Wii kind of like SCART to HDMI converter, so it does go full screen, but obviously the resolution doesn't look that good on the TV. So it would have been nice to experience the game with 4K resolution and graphics. And yeah, it's really a shame, because the game kind of falls into the category of early 2000s licensed product that now 20 years later will probably never ever be remade or remastered, because there are probably a lot of licensing issues with the game. Because yeah, the game was originally developed and published by EA, who had the rights back then to make games about the Jackson movies, but they didn't have the rights to make games about any of Tolkien's other lore. And nowadays, the Lord of the Rings license belongs to the Embracer Group, who are absolutely milking it for everything it's worth. So they're the ones that have they release Gollum. They're releasing this Tales of the Shire kind of like cozy village builder that's coming up soon. There's also like what is it? Is there like an Aragon game coming or something like that? So. And either way, Embracer basically have a whole wing that is just dedicated to making Lord of the Rings games because they're just trying to milk the property for everything it's worth. But unfortunately, I don't think the Third Age was successful enough back in the day that it would be profitable enough now to bring it back. So Embracer also are one of their development studios is meant to be doing the Knights of the Old Republic remaster, and obviously Knights of the Old Republic is a very popular game with a lot of fans, and yeah, that game probably it's worth doing the remaster because they'll make money with it. Unfortunately, with the Third Age, I don't think there's that many fans of it because it was so overlooked back in the day that doing a remaster would be worth it. Therefore, it's most likely that this podcast is the only way you'll get to experience this game, other than checking out some gameplay on YouTube. And that's kind of why I decided to dedicate an episode to the Third Age, because it was so influential on me as a teenager, even though I never finished it. And it's still a fantastic game and shows what a licensed game should be or can be, because it's very, very good. And yes, it's kind of a knockoff of Final Fantasy X, but it widened the Lord of the Rings lore. At the time of its release, when as a 14-year-old, Tolkien's lesser-known works were not readily available or that accessible for me to read. The game oozes polish and quality. It has scenes and music taken directly from the Jackson movies and has brand new voiceover lines from Sir Ian McKellen, with interesting and layered combat and, my favourite of all, awesome looking loot to find. So if you have a PlayStation 2, GameCube or original Xbox laying around, maybe try and pick up the game for a couple of quid and try it out yourself. Otherwise, if you have a PC or Steam Deck, maybe have a look if you can find a ROM and the upscaled graphics pack to give it a try, because I do think it is worth trying out, especially if you're an RPG fan. So yeah, guys, that was episode 42 of the Beat Your Backlog podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, it's not really a review. It's more of like a gushing of my love for this game, and like I said, because of the Lord of the Rings hype out now because of Rings of Power, I thought it might be good to get a Lord of the Rings game or episode out because of that. So yeah, I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know, were you also one of these people that loved the Lord of the Rings kind of movie tie-in games from back in the early 2000s? Like I said, I also bought the Two Towers and the Return of the King on GameCube, so I'll probably be dabbling with those at some point, since I spent all this money making it so that I can play GameCube games on the Wii. But yeah, let me know if you also have kind of a nostalgia or an affinity for those games, because they were fantastic games. Also, let me know if you've been watching Ring of Powers, what you think so far of season 2. So I think I've watched like an episode and a half so far, because I've not had that much time to kind of get into it, and I'm kind of a bit like, I don't really know where this is going, so would be really interested to see what you think. And of course, guys, let me remind you before we go that we are kind of Beat Your Backlog is a newish podcast, so it would be very, very helpful if you could leave us a review and follow us wherever you're listening. So thanks so much for listening, guys. Hope you have a great day. Bye bye.